if my work is bringing a lot of joy to other people, I love that. If they're like, wow, your work really resonates a joy that gives me joy, that I could never complain with. I love that. If that's all my work ever was, that would be just fine. However, I think generally if my work in some way is conveying a celebration of life, if it's lifting people up, I think that's a good thing, but I think there's a lot of different ways to do that. Some of it can be very direct with just, say flowers. People love flowers and they lift people's spirit. Okay, there's that. But then there's other ways to investigate life that seem more like maybe you're going down towards down a tunnel that maybe is a little less directly joyful, but ultimately is about celebrating the human spirit, or maybe even tackling a difficult subject. But to me, if you're tackling a difficult subject, life has difficulty. So you can be saying, I'm celebrating the human spirit, that we tackle difficult subjects, that we are fighting the hard fight to get through this life, because that is part of the human spirit, that we're fighters. I try for my starting point to always be, what am I interested in? What would I like on my own wall? And early on, that was mostly sort of straightforward versions of joy, and with a little bit of eroded joy, let's say. Like it was a romanticized notion of mid-century Americana, I think, early on. It was my dad, my parents' generation. I loved the images of that generation, the use of color, the design of the cars, all that kind of stuff. So I was my earliest entry into making my own paintings versus the earlier murals. The work I was doing for galleries were really interested in either road trip elements, just taking my own camera out, finding interesting things, signs or whatever, or setting up objects at home. I would buy things on eBay or find them at thrift shops or whatever. But they were very straightforward about the joy element. Look how nice, look how fun this product design is. Camera boxes, or all that kind of candies or whatever else. And a lot of that came obviously from Tebow, his sort of subject matter of hot dogs and lollipops and all that kind of stuff. And I like the idea that I'm bringing joy to other people through that, but only because it's what would bring me joy every morning, to wake up and see that on the wall. The first book that really made me want to be a fine artist, whatever that means, like a painter that's painting for himself through galleries or whatever, was a Wayne Tebow book. I was kind of doing murals a little bit still. My buddy was at Long Beach State. He went to the library at Long Beach State. He pulled out some books. One of them was a Wayne Tebow book written by Stephen Nash, I guess it is. And he showed me that book, and I was like, oh yeah, oh yes, this is my world. Thank you very much. I was sold. And that's when I started now around that time there was a show, a Tebow, I don't know, retrospective or not, but 50 years of painting or something, going around California to 5 different art museums, and I followed it to 4 of the 5. Everywhere it went, I'd go, I wanted to see it. And I got to meet him at one of them, not knowing he was even going to be there, but he was there. Super charming, spent 10 minutes with me and my friends just chatting it up, got a picture with him, the whole thing. But that show, the earlier show that was roaming around, really got me even more interested, because then you could look at them in person. I'm in love with the book, but they're this big. In person, a lot of them are very large, and even the small ones, the amount of colors he's working with, you just got to see him in person. And then falling in love with his etchings and his pencil work and everything else. So that book was cemented in my memory. It was this is the book that made me want to be an artist. And then fast forward about 10 years, I was invited by the Palm Springs Art Museum. They were doing some sort of benefit for the museum, and they wanted to show a couple artists' work at a cocktail party thing at somebody's house. And so I was invited to be part of that. I had some paintings up, and then people told me, here's some of the guests that are going to be there, so you know their names ahead of time, whatever. And they're so Steve and Carol Nash. And I'm like, wait a minute, hold on a second. Are we talking about the Steve Nash, who was at the time the director of that Palm Springs Art Museum. But I was like, this is the Steve Nash who wrote that Wayne Thiebaud book that made me want to be an artist. And they're like, yes. I'm like, okay, hold everything. So I got to meet him really quick. And then I don't remember how I found him, but somehow either he gave me his card or something. I sent him like, oh my gosh, you have no idea. You know, like after the fact, I was like, just thank you. It's such a nice thing to get to meet you, because your book made me want to be an artist. So even in a roundabout way, you're just writing a book about Wayne Thiebaud, and you don't know, like there's other people that are significantly influenced by this thing. And so he said like, oh yeah, no, your work is great. It's, you know, it's Thiebaud-esque, but you've got your own thing going on and all of that. And so we ended up becoming friends over the last, 10 or 15 years. And every time in Palm Springs, I go visit him and his wife and all that. And when Wayne passed, I forget who texted me first. I had a collector that the museum at UC Davis had a celebration for Wayne's 101st birthday. They were thinking he might be there. I had a friend who had a ticket for that event and invited me as one of her guests, so I was able to go there. He wasn't able to make it, but I was kind of aware, like, okay, this is the 101st birthday, like we're all celebrating together, it was great. And then a few months after that, he passed. Somebody texted me, and I'm thinking like, Steve and Carol are gonna know right away, because he wrote the first book, and that was the first book, like real book, not like a little catalog for a show or whatever, but like the first significant book of Wayne's. And so I called them right away, and Carol answered Steve's phone. She's like, Rob, how's it going? Like, she's such a, like, you know, joyful person. And I'm just like, oh no, and I just like started bawling. I'm sitting in my van, I remember just bawling. I can't even talk, I'm like blubbering. And she's like, Ron, what is it? What is it? What is it? I'm like, Wayne. She's like, oh no. All I could say was Wayne. And she's like, did he die? I'm like, yeah. She's like, oh. And so I went to their house about like a week later, and we had a toast to Wayne. And I'm like, how did that come full circle to me being inspired by this guy, to like 20 years later, I get to go to the person's house who wrote the book that made me want to be an artist because of Wayne's work. And now we're toasting him after this amazing career and life. And I think the best thing about Wayne is that his life was maybe better than his work. Because I look at those so much from early on, and then just got more and more interested in thinking about color and how it affects us, from cereal box design. Well, what are they thinking? They're trying to get you to buy this box instead of this box. Why? Because it's triggering some synapse in your brain that gets us excited when it sees this box, and color does that to us. And that's kind of trickery when you're doing advertising, whether we think that's okay trickery or not. But as an artist, it's certainly okay. Like, you're trying to say, hey, I'm trying to lift your mood. I'm trying to get you to pay attention to this part of the painting, because there's a narrative that goes with that arc or whatever. But I think more with the Helens especially, though probably with all my work, because I'm so interested in other artists, the way they use color, I think it's more subconscious, that it's just part of my fabric, that's maybe one of my strengths, you know, that I know how to pull that out as well, even though I'm not really aware of it until after the fact. But for instance, I will be looking at a photo. Whenever I'm painting a large painting, I print out dozens of 8x10 photos of, say, each section almost at real size that I'm projecting or painting it on the canvas. So if I'm painting Helen's hair or her face, and her face is about this size or her hair is about that size, I do a printout that's pretty close to that size, because I want to see all the details when I blow that up. Well, in actuality, when you blow up that image of, say, Helen's hair particularly, because it's dark, she has dark hair, so it kind of just comes off as like, here's this brownish black kind of, you know, realm here. In my mind, I'm seeing that, but then when I translate it to paint, because I always hold in my left hand the photo, and then I'm mixing colors right hand and looking back and forth and then going back to the canvas. When I look at it after the fact, I'm like, this looks nothing like, and it kind of like does in a certain sense, because people think, oh, you're a photorealist. I'm like, I'm really not. And if you looked at the photo and looked at that, like, it reads from a ways back like photorealism or like a photo, But you get closer and there's so much wackiness going on in there, which I think is related to my love of Van Gogh in particular, and also Tebow, of just like, if you get close to a Tebow, 30 feet back, looks like a person, get up close, it's just a bunch of squiggles of colors. My brother was really interested in photography, so I was exposed to that as an idea from the time I was a little guy. And then I worked at a photo lab from the time I was 16, so everything's photo-based, you know, and there's really no need for, I sketch with the photo, with the camera, and then I put it in Photoshop and I play with that, and there's no pencil on paper really ever. I do my own photography all the time for still lifes or when I'm out road tripping or whatever, but I'm not trained anyway, not inclined to learn more about it. I know just enough to get the image I want, and then I know how to go from there to where I want to go for a painting. But to me, that's the sketchbook. And so it's just, I think it's different for everybody. I think the teaching that sketching is the starting point to everything is very limiting. My first job was, I worked at a 45-minute photo lab when I was 16, and I worked there off and on for about 6 years. When I was doing murals, I wouldn't work at a photo lab at all, and then in between murals, I'd go back and work either full-time or part-time or whatever. So I was there quite a bit, and so another sort of being immersed in photos, other people's photos, you know, uninteresting, but just photos all the time. And at the beginning of the day, we had to turn on the machines and you had to do test prints. And so they would just be a white piece of paper coming out of the machine with little rows of either sort of hash marks, I remember, probably some were like straight lines or little beads or something, but just testing out the CMYK. So I've always been attracted to that CMYK, you know, the juiciness. But I also love that, the circle, you know, the 3 circles, the CMYK together, and then they make the, you know, all the colors that they make in between there. So I just at some point really wanted to start playing with that as a form of abstraction. Because we think of abstraction as like, oh, let's just make it messier, muddier, more blurry, you know, that's kind of the typical, like the Impressionists, like less detail and more, you know, muddy brushstroke, and then go into Cubism as another form of abstraction. But it's like, well, no, you could still do photorealism with abstraction at the same time, and there's different ways to break things down to show that abstraction. So I'm just interested in, like, I go into the computer with an image, I color separate, so I have that all these different versions, and I make copies of all those. And then I go back to the original, and then I start splicing and dicing in Photoshop, where I'm like, what if I took just a strip of the full color spectrum, so this person looks like this person, and then I take one little strip where I overlay that so you can't see the full color, and you only see what would be there if you removed everything but the yellow. And a lot of times there's no yellow in something, in an area of an image. So that's like what people aren't necessarily think about all the time. So if you did separate, there'd be nothing there. Other times it'd be a very strong yellow because that's the main thing in that part of that image. So I'm just playing with that a little bit, and it is kind of coming out a little like those, if there was a glitch in the printer when I was 16 and a half image got printed and then the machine stopped, maybe the cyan would keep printing for a half inch or something. That's kind of how mine are starting to come out, but that's not really intentional. It's more that I'm probably not that creative, and there's some part of my brain from when I was 16 just going, yeah, that's what it looks like. And I'm like, okay, cool, let's just do it exactly like that. I'm not conscious of it, but certainly looking at them, I'm thinking, you know, with those two, with Desert Dorothy and Ineffable, they are just kind of rows of how those colors maybe would come out if there was a glitch in the printer or something. I did think a little bit, Desert Dorothy was the first one, and I thought a little bit about, like, I wonder if people are going to think this is weird that I'm cutting right through the middle of a face. But that was what occurred to me, was like, that's how it would happen. If you're talking about randomness, it's not going to be, it actually makes it much worse if you look at it as like, oh, here's this perfect part, we're going to go right down the middle, and then that part over here will be just cyan. I mean, it's like, that's so conventional, so predictable. Don't give people predictable. Like, it's such an insult to the viewer to give them predictability, right? So to me, if something was going to happen, if something was being printed out, it would happen right in the middle of something, right? Whatever's in that image. So I just went like, okay, there's the middle line right there. And that makes it more interesting because you have half of her face look the way you expect it to, and then half of it you're like, oh wow, look how it is if it's only cyan. And the image of Candace, the same thing. It was kind of, it's begging a question. The new series is tentatively called the Oxford 12, but they're rather unconventional nudes, and they basically started with the Helen series, which I always think, oddly enough, like in quotes, because they don't seem like they're related in some way, but they are. Basically, when I was painting Helen, that was the first time I got really aware that when you're, as an artist, physically painting skin, it's a deeper emotion. Like, I'm feeling a deeper emotion. So even if it's a kneecap or a toe, it doesn't matter. It's just like you're painting skin. The magic trick that you're turning pigment and mayonnaise or whatever whatever your paint is made out of into a person is performing the magic trick even on the theoretical magician. Like, I'm the one performing the trick for whoever is going to look at the paint, but it's even working on me while I'm painting it. They're like, oh, this person is coming to life. Well, no, it's pigments being smeared around that was pulled out of the dirt in France and mixed with olive oil or something, you know? So I got really interested in that. Like, when I'm painting leaves, I'm not so interested. I'm wanting to hear whatever music's in the background. When I'm painting Helen's face or anybody, their face, their hands, I'm unaware of the rest of the world. I'm so entranced by this human thing. And I hadn't painted people that often before the Helen series, so I wasn't exposed to that often, of like that emotion that like, oh wow, this is happening while I'm working on it. So that just slowly over a couple years got me thinking about, well, wait a minute, like I'm connecting to a very human thing, and all that entails of like hopes and dreams and loss. I mean, with Helen, she's passed. So all of like, what does a life mean after it's gone? But the best we can do is live life to the fullest and enjoy the people around us and that kind of thing. And she certainly did. And so I'm thinking about all that while I'm painting that series, and then thinking like, well, strictly in theory, could you maximize that emotion as the artist if you removed everything but skin? And I just wanted to show people as people and just say, therefore, if this is exactly what they look like, therefore, this has value because they have value. So I'm not trying to show them in any light particularly, aside from that is what they look like in light. So, and I was very interested in direct sunlight because it shows everything. Traditional nudes are very diffused light because then it hides any blemishes. And I wanted to show them larger than life so that you fully saw. I could not hide a wrinkle from you or a scar or whatever from you as the viewer. And also that's the size people are, so let's paint them that size. That was kind of my thinking, was like, let's just make it as like close to a reality because we're not hiding from reality. That was my thinking on like the scale. They have power again if I paint them large versus a smaller nude can be like you're being more voyeuristic of them and you're taking away their power. So I was just interested in all of that and started making paintings of people life-size, men and women, you know, all races, all body types, all, you know, just sort of the full spectrum of what people really look like. And especially with regards to age, more than anything, like really wanting middle age more so than what we already celebrate. I was very intentional about like, yeah, I want this to be about humanity. As I continued this series, I realized the people themselves I was starting to make connections with, and I wanted to tell their stories more. More so, I think, when the first couple models came to the house to do their photo sessions, my thinking was, and I told my assistant this, let's make this as fast as possible because they are not going to feel comfortable. I mean, they're comfortable, they've made peace that they want to be part of this series. They like this, okay? But still, they don't know me, so we're not familiar enough for them to know whether it's a comfortable thing to be nude in front of me with a camera. So I just said, look, they've committed to this. They like the idea of it, but when it actually comes time, they might be nervous or whatever. So like, let's just make it like as quick as like, oh, okay, here's what we're gonna do. So I just ran through. I said, don't, let's not like spend forever with them, because we don't want them to feel like, my God, like forever. Let's like let them off of this pain for, So I'm thinking when they show up, I'll just tell them like, here's the poses I want. There's 2 very simple poses. We're gonna go outside, whenever you're ready, we'll take the pictures. It'll take 2 minutes, which is exactly how long it takes. And then we're done, see you later, that's it. Okay, fine. That's not the way it went at all. Everybody that showed up wanted to talk for like 20 minutes. And I realized and they were talking about very personal things at times, or philosophical things, why they wanted to be part of the series, or their thoughts about their body, or their thoughts about, their family or whatever. And I was like, wow, okay, this is interesting. Why? After the first couple left, Allison and I kept looking at each other like, oh my God, if we could have gotten that on tape, because their story is so much more human. But then we also realized that would never happen, because they're only doing it because they're not on tape. And they're kind of saying, wait a minute, if I'm going to be vulnerable with you physically in a way that our society is not used to, undressing for another person or whatever, I have to know you're trustworthy, kind of thing. Like, I'm going to share a little bit about myself and we'll interact so we have a little bit of a connection. And that's the sense that I was getting from it. But I realized, like, if they were on camera, they would have shut down immediately. So after the fact, I'm hoping 6 months from now or something that I can, anybody who's interested, may not everybody's interested, I don't know, but definitely make it more human. I'd like to do a 30-minute or an hour interview with each model about whatever. I don't even care what, because it doesn't matter. The whole point is just you're you. So if they'd like to talk about why they thought the project was interesting and decide to volunteer, great. They want to talk about their body, great. They want to talk about society or how they ended up in Oxford, because it is a very community-oriented now. Like, the series is about, like, most of these people either know each other or know each other through proxy, like this person and they know the other model or whatever. So yeah, I think that's an interesting part of the story, because ultimately, even though we're all individuals going through life in some sense alone, we're also all in this together and all connected, even with strangers that we'll never meet. Whatever somebody's doing on the other side of the world right now is influencing me in ways I don't know, and vice versa. So it's all of that kind of bunched up as well.